Michelangelo Buonarroti was born in 1475 in the town of Caprice when Leonardo was 23. Michelangelo was sent to study the ancient Roman statuary collected in the gardens of Lorenzo de' Medici. From the sculptor who was curator there, he learned a way of twisting his figures into a contrapposto, a twisting of the shoulders while the hips remained frontal. In Lorenzo's court, he rubbed elbows with the leading thinkers of the Renaissance. But Michelangelo never learned polite manners. He was terse and rude. His manners did not win him friends, and he earned himself a broken nose for his rudeness, which disfigured him all of his life. Michelangelo created his first great marble sculpture while in Rome, the Pietà. It is today in St. Peter's Cathedral. It is a single figure of Mary grieving over her dead son Christ. Christ is limp in death on her knees. The sadness portrayed is beyond words. Every muscle is perfect and relaxed. The life has parted from Christ's limbs. Also, there is something strange about Mary. She is too young to be his mother. Michelangelo's reply was that it was the purity of her soul. Michelangelo hated to imitate a living person unless she or he was beautiful. Like the ancient Greeks, he idealized people into physical perfection. Yet he personally lived miserably, slept in his clothes, and never washed. In the workshop of the Florence Cathedral was a massive block of marble. They nicknamed it the Giant. For 50 years no artist dared to tackle it. From its slimness he knew it should contain an adolescent, not quite filled out as yet. From the Giant he carved David, the herd boy who slew Goliath. After working for 2 years, he unveiled his David. The anticipation was feverish. Spectators were awestruck at the heroic size. The boy's hands and head were disproportionately large, just as a teenage boy would be. Every muscle, every vein is sculpted with an accuracy never before seen in marble. The defiant look, the slingshot casually over his left shoulder. He represents youth defiant, and so self-assured that he can do whatever he sets himself out to do. The human figure was almost exclusively Michelangelo's sole passion. He studied his predecessors, Giotto, Leonardo, Mantegna. He even dissected corpses. With the human figure, especially in sculpture, which he preferred to painting, he expressed all that he felt. He said that a relief is even more expressive than painting, so that when he painted his Tondo, which is a circular picture of the Holy Family, it looked like a relief. The figures are nearly three-dimensional. They are sculptural, and they are more heroic than tender. Pope Julius II summoned Michelangelo to Rome to make a tomb for him in marble. Michelangelo spent months in the great marble quarry of Carrara, choosing the stone for the monument. But when he returned, the Pope had cooled to the idea, and Michelangelo returned to Florence in a huff. Julius demanded that he return. Michelangelo refused, and the city of Florence refused to give him up. Julius threatened to excommunicate the whole city. The two great powers in Italy were on the verge of war over an artist. So keenly did the mighty of the Renaissance crave the glory which only godlike artists could give them. Eventually Michelangelo did return to Rome, and he was told to paint in fresco the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. For 4 years he lay on his back, painting into wet plaster. When at last it was ready and the fresco was dry, the Romans came in droves to see the most stupendous pictorial ever created, like a giant comic book. The Sistine Chapel ceiling covers 10,000 square feet of plaster. There are 343 figures, 10 to 18 feet high. The monumental scheme depicts the story of creation and the redemption of man. The architectural frames mark 9 histories. Number 1, the origin of the world, separation of light from darkness, creation of the sun and the moon, separation of the earth and water. Frame 2, the origin of man, the creation of Adam and Eve, temptation and expulsion from the garden. Frame 3, the origins of evil, the sacrifice of Noah, the great flood and the drunkenness of Noah. On either side are giant gloomy figures of prophets and ancient sibyls who predicted the coming of Christ. Da Vinci painted tenderness and mystery. Michelangelo painted sheer, robust energy. Even his women are muscular. In Michelangelo's heaven, everyone's been to the gym. His vision of God is massive and eternal. God creates Adam with such authority that his divinity cannot be questioned. The prophet Daniel has such overpowering force that redemption cannot be doubted, even by brave men. Michelangelo created the kind of man who is more than equal to the task of dominating the earth, even as his mighty God dominates the heaven. 30 years later, he completed the Last Judgment on the back wall of the Sistine. 200 figures, and each one is an entirely different tragedy or triumph. It is a blast of energy which will influence art in the future. But of all the magnificent works which Michelangelo produced, perhaps none is so imposing as the great dome over St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. It sits, a thing of mystery atop a Greek cross design, on 16 pairs of columns. The dome soars with the grace of a fine sculptor. He lowered the pitch of the dome until it made a restful curve inside and outside. The dome of Michelangelo Buonarroti was the inspiration for the dome over our nation's capital in Washington, D.C. The spirit of the Renaissance is still with us today.